On December 7, 1891, a boy was born in the small village of Corleone, Sicily. This boy would go on to become the most powerful mafia boss America has ever seen. But many don't know the troubles he went through to rise to the top. This is the story of Vito Andolini. Born Vito Andolini, Vito was a quiet kid and had a normal childhood, until he didn't. At the age of 9, Vito's father was killed by a local Sicilian mafia boss after getting into a feud with another villager who took his case to the mob boss, Don Cicci. Vito's father, Antonio, refused to pay tribute to him and was murdered a week later with his body torn apart by Lupara blasts. It got worse for the Andolinis. During the funeral for Antonio, Vito's older brother, Paolo, was shot dead after swearing vengeance on Cicci. Shortly after this, 2 thugs working for Don Cicci came knocking on the door looking for Vito. They tell his mother, Don Cicci thinks he's hot-headed, just like his father. The desperate mother takes Vito to the Don herself and begs for forgiveness, telling Cicci that Vito is dumb-witted and harmless. But he denies her request, thinking that he will grow up and seek revenge. All out of options, Vito's mother spares herself, allowing Vito to escape via a boat. With the Abundandos to New York City, Vito lands at Ellis Island with nothing but a bag, he doesn't speak English, and he has no home. When he is being checked for immigration and by the officer, the man confuses Vito's last name with his hometown city and gives him the name Vito Corleone. His old city is now etched into his name. The old trauma and agony of what happened to him in Corleone is now always there to remind him. These young days for Vito shaped him into the Don he became. Was it his last name, constantly reminding him of the past, that invigorated him to rise to the top? Becoming an orphan, becoming an immigrant, not even speaking the language? Vito grew up in New York, taken in by the Abundando family, where he befriended what would become his best friend Genco. By the age of 18, Vito met and married a beautiful Sicilian lady by the name of Carmela. He began working at Genco's father's grocery store, earning an honest wage. But shortly into this, he loses his job at the hands of the neighborhood Don. Don Fanucci insisted his nephew work at the grocery store, moving Vito out while also taking money out of the cash register for, quote, protection. Fanucci often used this tactic on elderly business owners without male children knowing they would be forced to pay. Even though Vito didn't say anything about losing his job, he felt a cold anger for the dreaded Fanucci. And now at this point, Vito had 2 sons and 4 mouths to feed, so Vito turned to petty crimes. Desperate to feed his family, Vito is approached by a couple neighborhood hoodlums, Tessio and Clemenza, and the trio begin engaging in the hijacking of trucks of silk dresses. The 3 would then sell the dresses around the neighborhood and to wholesalers. Shortly into this scheme, Don Fanucci hears about this and demands a cut of their profits, $600. When Vito goes to talk with his friends about this, Clemenza and Tessio insist on paying him, but Vito tells them he can reason and negotiate with the feared mobster. Vito noticed some small inconsistencies in Fanucci's so-called status and power. He watched a group of kids cut him, which caused Fanucci to kill one of the kids and made the other 2 pay him an indemnity. This goes back to Vito's old town, Corleone. Vito remembered what happened with Don Cicci and the ruthlessness he operated at. No one was spared in this life. Vito's past helped him unveil the facade of Don Fanucci. He goes to Fanucci with just $150, lowballing the man. Vito, at this point, has seen this story. He is refusing to bow down to Fanucci like his father did to Cicci. He rejects having to be persecuted by these mafia dons, realizing he must become one of them to stop this cycle. Once Fanucci is taken out, Vito gains an immense amount of respect, with many business owners and racket bosses paying him to ensure they are safe. Soon, he's making $100 a week, an enormous amount of money back then, and begins his olive oil front. Vito was all about respect and helping others. He garnered a reputation for never turning someone down who came to him for help, as long as you would return the favor. A few years later, Vito returns home for the first time since leaving Corleone, this time with revenge on his mind. The memory of his past, tattooed into his last name, reminds Vito, after he's risen to the top of his neighborhood, it's time to complete unfinished business. He arranges a meeting with the aging Don Cicci to gain his blessing for the olive oil business. Don Cicci was right. Vito did return for his revenge, stabbing him across the chest. By the early 1930s, Vito would continue to rise up, expanding his power and connections. He was known for offering good-paying jobs to anyone who would work for him. He would give encouraging words and goodwill to anyone who came for help. He would go on to finance the education of the bright young boys who would soon become lawyers and judges. Many Italians would come to him for election advice, giving him a great amount of political power. But early into the 30s, Vito would face a problem. Even though Vito was rising in the mob world, there were still bigger, more powerful dons. Vito got into a dispute with the most powerful don at the time, Giuseppe Mariposa, sparking what was the Olive Oil War. Mariposa sent a call to Al Capone, telling him he needed his best two hitmen to whack Vito. But Vito had vast contacts who relayed this message to him before the damage was done. Vito sent Luca Brasi to dismantle them. Mariposa severely underestimated Vito, as he was losing several of his soldiers who had lost faith in him. His regime was being continuously chipped away, and by New Year's Eve, Tessio was able to whack him at a restaurant. With Mariposa's assassination, this marked the end of the war, and solidified Vito as the head of the most powerful family in New York. The Don was overseeing a business that relied on gambling, bootlegging, and murder. Despite this, Vito held contempt for selling hard drugs and prostitution within the life, which caused a deep resentment between him and Philip Tattaglia. But did this cost him? By now, Vito had 4 children, along with many other godchildren as well, and there were other up-and-coming hustlers. During the meeting with Virgil Sollozzo, Vito declines the offer due to the aversion he has with hard drugs. But during the meeting, his son Sonny hints at having interest in what Virgil was saying. This causes Virgil to put a hit out on Vito in order to get Sonny to go through with the deal. While Vito's collecting fruit outside his office, the 2 gunmen ambush Vito, shooting him 5 times. As a result of this, Sonny takes over as the acting Don, calling a war on the Tattaglias and Sollozzo. But unfortunately, Vito's oldest son is shot dead after being lured into a trap. This moment ties back into Vito's past, emulating how his father Antonio lost his eldest son as well. You could argue Vito's inability to adapt to the new times surrounding drugs caused these sequences of events to happen. This moment is similar to a young Vito taking out Don Fanucci many years back. Fanucci and Vito continued to do the same thing, and although it was successful, someone younger and hungry saw a better opportunity. After Sonny died, Vito calls for a meeting between the heads of the 5 families, putting an end to the war. Vito's shrewdness still shines, as after the meeting, he figures out who is trying to dismantle the family, Barzini. With Sonny dead, the unlikely Michael steps in to take over the family, with Vito declining in health. As Vito and Michael are planning their revenge, Vito dies of a heart attack while playing with his grandson Anthony. Vito had a life of misfortune in the beginning, turning it into a life of abundance. The Don lived a great life, paving the way for his friends and family. And that's the video. Did you enjoy watching the flashbacks of young Vito rising to the top mafia boss of his time? Comment below your favorite Vito Corleone moment below. Thanks for watching, and leave a like and subscribe.